What was the biggest risk you have taken? I bought a house without looking at it. I don't regret it, but wouldn't do it again. 6 years ago I had a massive heart attack. The ambulance came, and it was clear what was happening. They said there was a hospital close by that could try and stabilize me, and there was another hospital 30 minutes away that had a cardiac unit that could do whatever was needed. The risk was that if I went to the one close by they may not be able to do anything. I told them to take me to the one 30 minutes away, even though they indicated there was a chance dying while en route. I made it there, and while in the operating room I coded for 2 minutes. End up it was a widowmaker heart attack. I woke up 3 days later on a ventilator, but made it through it. If I had chosen the local hospital I never would have made it. Threatening my employer with legal action. Edit I'd just like to say that I don't recommend doing this unless you have an actual reason and a strong case. My now ex-employer threatened to sack me if I didn't came back to work immediately. I was on sick leave with severe depression and anxiety shortly after completing treatment for a rare form of breast cancer at 34. They ducked up. 2009 the world was economically on fire. Layoffs weekly at my job. Toddler and one on the way. Decided to double down everything I own to buy a house in an area I could not afford under normal circumstances. On the way to the closing I was shitting diamonds. Before we entered the closing, I looked to my wife and said if I lose my job, we lose everything. House, cars, retirement, all of it. But if we make it, we will do very well. I just sold that house last week. While it was emotional to let it go, we raised 3 kids, made a lot of friends and memories, and was able to make enough profit to wipe out her student loans. I got accepted to a good university the same day my band was offered a recording contract. There was no way I could do both, so I chose the contract. I look back on those years I spent traveling and playing music for a living as some of the best memories I've ever had, and I did eventually end up with an associate's degree from a local college, but I'll always wonder what could have been different. When I was 5 and just starting to swim, I decided that the best way to learn was to jump right in, off the high dive. Not many people can say that their courage peaked at 5. I moved from the Gold Coast, Australia to Newcastle almost immediately after I graduated high school. I knew no one there except for the deadbeat now ex I was moving with. Best decision I have ever made. Ex and I broke up. I found my passion working in a coffee roastery, and I met my now husband on a bus. Abruptly quit my job career and dropped my entire life in Germany to come back to the States and be with my ex. Right before COVID. Things didn't work out. Such is life. Always masturbate before making a decision like that. Good advice, my friend. Felt very nervous before a presentation in university and thought I was going to do quite poorly on it as I hadn't prepared very well for it. I just thought, duck it, and boldly went up to the lecturer to ask if I could do my presentation first. It paid off and went much better than expected, and I got one of the highest marks in the class on the assignment. Gave a 5-minute speech on how erectile dysfunction will cause the apocalypse to 2 middle-aged women in an academic speech competition. I voluntarily became homeless to quit paying rent. After 2 months of sleeping in the woods I was given an old car from a relative unsolicited and lived out of that for 2 years. It was actually pretty comfy once I got my routine down. I have a place now because I need to have somewhere to take care of a family member. Getting my friends to all watch Human Centipede together so I could spend more time with this guy I was interested in. He sat next to me. We touched legs as the woman was screaming into the other guy's butt cheeks. I lost my virginity the next week. Sold my car, packed my things, got on a train, and moved halfway across the country to be with a woman I'd been with in person less than 20 days total. 12 years later married with a kid. Craziest, stupidest, best decision I've ever made. Followed a sketchy homeless man into a dark alley in San Francisco at 2 a.m. I was 15. Alone. Armed with nothing but a paperback copy of The Light Fantastic. My teachers were asleep. No one knew I'd left our motel. And it was my first time in a city bigger than Copenhagen. I should, by all accounts, be dead. Ended up saving his friend's life by calling 911 and applying what basic first aid I'd been taught. Quit my job of 10 years. Rented out my fully furnished house to strangers. And then proceeded to backpack around South America for 6 months. I was half convinced I was just going to come back to an empty house. Returned and everything was in place. Even the booze we had left behind. I made a couple of bucks renting the place out. And 3 months later got a job making 10% more than the one I left. When I say fully I mean fully. Not just the furniture, but the dishes, utensils, towels, TVs, etc. Basically removed the laptop, jewelry, guns, and clothing and left everything else. I left my last job due to some health issues. I was expected to return to the same kind of work in December. I refused when I found out they were trying to get me to work in the same building that caused my illness. I knew it was a risk, that I could lose the job and benefits. But my health is way more important than working a crummy desk job. It's not just mental health issues. It's physical ailments too. I'm currently on leave without pay while I figure out my next steps. It's scary. I have some medical benefits coming in from the feds, but that will run out eventually. But I have faith things will work out for the best. Life is too short to stay at a job for benefits and a pension. Especially when the toxic and hostile workplace culture causes you serious illnesses. Moved my wife and kid to a different state to help start a business with someone I only met in an interview because he promised me a steady salary. Worked out well for about 9 years and he kept his promises. Then another 2 after a 1-year hiatus. No longer working with him and he owes me about 20k in back pay. But hey, the first decade was a heck of a ride. I kissed my crush at a Christmas party as part of a magic trick. Because we were both too scared to tell each other we liked each other. We'd been good friends for a couple years but neither wanted to ruin the friendship by shooting our shots. It worked. He married me 2 years later. Left my country in Europe to marry someone in the UK that I had met online. We had dated online for about 9 months and had met once for 2 weeks. I had just turned 20 and was laying in bed with my girlfriend of 4 months who had just turned 19 when I got the bright idea to ask her to marry me. Almost 23 years later and she's taking a nap while I lay next to her playing on my phone. I definitely made the right call that night. Every time I've confessed my love to a crush, sometimes it worked out, sometimes not. The times when it did was absolutely worth the times when it didn't. I decided to quit my job, sell all my possessions, and sublet my apt over the course of 2 weeks from when I made the decision, so I could drive across the country and return to live in a larger city. That was 7 years ago, and my creative practice has flourished in said larger city since then. Quitting my job without another one lined up. I've actually done it twice. Each time it lead me to something better or set me on a path to something better. Right now I'm in a pretty good job I enjoy that is a 5-minute walk from home. I'm also possibly going to be able to get a promotion that will either help me pay off the mortgage 10 years early or only work 3 days a week. Turning down 1 million in cash for my business because I think I can get more for it in the future. Knowing I would need to retake class for my engineering year, I decided that duck it. I'd do a 3-month formation to have a paper saying I can do shit, where I slept from beginning to end, and aced the final group project by myself, because duck group project, and tried to look for a job. It didn't go well. It was hard to find a job in it, since every company wanted an engineer mastering tens of language for an intern's salary. So I'm currently reconverting into formation. But I think deciding to drop those expensive educations that lead me nowhere instead of wasting years of my life was the good decision nonetheless. delivered a speech defending aspects of eugenics to a professor whose child had Downs. I defended the idea of removing genetic issues from the gene pool. I also totally stressed the fact that it would be impossible to actually have a eugenics program, that wouldn't be harnessed to various agendas, that would make it a horrible thing to try. This was back in the 90s. Some gene mod and screening was pretty basic, but I pointed out it would become the new eugenics if we aren't careful. Prof said I was going to fail you as soon as you opened your mouth. But somehow, you never crossed the line. Every time I thought you were going to, you somehow avoided it. Got me an A. Growing weed when one of the roommates called the cops on our roommate landlord for taking his prescribed medication. So far so good. 4 out of the 5 people living here are also invested in getting free weed, so he's been made very aware that if he goes anywhere near the locked room that bad things will happen. He has no idea what's in there, but I'm sure he suspects something. And the cops aren't listening to him anymore, since the last time he called it was just someone taking completely legal life-saving medication prescribed by a doctor. He's only gonna be here for another month, because the guy who owns the house wasn't too happy about getting his medication stolen and returned by the cops. He is pretty happy about free weed though. I was 26. There was an opening in New Brunswick in my company. Didn't know the area. Had never been. But decided in 2 hours that I was going to take it. It was a trying period in my life. Took me 5 days to drive there in March. Drove into the province during one of the worst blizzards they'd had in 20 years. Thankfully my little car was loaded down with stuff and I white knuckled it to town and the hotel. This was in 1996. Long before I ever had a cell phone. IWA a young woman. Applying for student loans in an effort to upgrade my skills for more professional work. Guess how well that went? I broke into Tiffany's at midnight. Did I go for the vault? No. I went for the chandelier. It's priceless. As was taking it down, a woman catches me. She tells me to stop. It's her father's business. She's Tiffany. I say no. We make love all night. In the morning the cops come, and I escape in one of their uniforms. I tell her to meet me in Mexico, but I go to Canada. I don't trust her. Besides, I like the cold. 30 years later, I get a postcard. I have a son and he's the chief of police. This is where the story gets interesting. I tell Tiffany to meet me in Paris, by the Trocadero. She's been waiting for me all these years. She's never taken another lover. I don't care. I don't show up. I go to Berlin. That's where I stash the chandelier. I married my boyfriend after 5 months of dating in a secret ceremony at 20 years old. 6 months later I dropped out of college to move 1100 miles to live with him. My mom was so pissed. 8 years later we are still together and have a 1-year-old, and my mom is our biggest fan. Dropped everything and moved 1200 miles away at 18 to be with a girl I had only met once. I didn't have enough money to go back, and I didn't have a job in the new city. Neither of us had any business being in a relationship, but it was essentially a hard reset on my life. No one knew me or anything about my past. I had no expectations to meet. I have never been, and will never again be freer than I was at that moment. Consider subscribing if you enjoyed this video, and if you want to see more of Reddit Universe.